welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author and illustrator of an absolutely gorgeous book. It really took my breath away this past weekend, and I had so much fun reading it and looking more into a lot of really interesting stories, and I am so excited to talk. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, hi. My name is Katy Horan. I wrote and illustrated a book called Murder Ballads, Illustrated Lyrics and Lore. It's being published by Andrews McMeel and coming out April 29th. I don't know if you already said that.
No, that's good. I'm glad you said that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming by the show. As I said, this book is like absolutely breathtaking. Before we talk about it, could you tell us a little bit about your career as an illustrator and author and how we got here?
Yeah, wow. I mean, the fact that author is now part of that is it's still not it's I never thought that was going to happen, to be honest. I never thought I was going to ever actually write something. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a long story, but basically, I got a BFA in illustration from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2003, and I fully was like, I'm going to be a children's book illustrator. That was like all I wanted to do. I moved to New York, and then I got rejected from like lots and lots from everybody. Apparently, back then, even though my work was completely different back then, and I would consider very like cutesy and innocent, was still considered like too dark and creepy. So I actually then took a break from illustration for a long time, and I mostly showed in galleries for like 10 years, sort of all over the place, and kind of, that was like just a bunch of hustling I was doing, just kind of scraping by. But then the incredible author and poet Taisia Kotayskaya, here's also here in Austin, she discovered me on Tumblr. She saw like an image of mine on Tumblr of like a painting, and she got in touch, and we eventually made this book together called Literary Witches, which y'all should check out. It's our sort of visual and literary interpretations of great women writers as witches, or just women of power, magic power. And then we did an oracle deck based on that as well. And then I've just been doing kind of on and off different illustration things since. And then I got this book deal in about 2023, and I've just been kind of working on it ever since.
And I love that Oracle deck, the Literary Witches deck.
Oh, good.
So beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really love your art style. Like it looks very, like early American, very historical in a lot of ways, but it feels very contemporary too. Like, how did you evolve your style?
Well, I love that you caught that like early American thing. Like early colonial folk art it's my jam. Is It's like I'll go to a museum and there might be like some, I don't know, Picasso's or something. But if I run across like an Amy Phillips portrait or something, that's a deep cut. I am so excited. So yeah, I mean, folk art, folklore, folk everything has been a large source of inspiration for me. It works out great because in folk, I am not able to, or it's really difficult for me to create like space in images. Like I'm really bad at making things have like perspective and stuff. It's just not my strong suit. So folk art flattens everything. And so I was like, oh, well, this is kind of like a way for me to sort of cheat on having to do that part of it. And then I'm also very influenced by film, particularly horror, all things, most things horror, of the horror genre. So I kind of combine those things a lot of the time. Right. And also just I think a lot comes from like my love of storybook illustration as well, and like the greats. I mean, Maurice Sendak is my favorite like artist of all time. So yeah, so being like a fan of illustration and illustrators as well, like definitely informs my work.
Yeah, and I think that style is so perfect for this project because you do get that sort of perfect crossroads of like the folk imagery and stories, and then like the horror tradition that comes in with the murder
Hmm.
because I think it really
Yes.
plays into a lot of those themes really well. So, yeah,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about murder ballads and how did they
Okay.
capture your interest?
So I first heard a murder ballad that I remember back in like the 2000s when I was living in New York, and like my boyfriend, then boyfriend, now husband's friend was in a bluegrass band who was playing at this bar. And we went, and he I just remember hearing the lyrics of this one song. I didn't know what a murder ballad was at this point, but I it was about a sister who killed her sister because she was jealous over a guy. Yeah, and then she throws her in the river, and then the sister's body floats down to a pond where a fiddler comes along and makes a fiddle out of her bones and hair, and then the fiddle would play and like tell the tale of her murder. And at that point, and still even now saying it, that's just some of the most, for me, like for what I love, that's some of the most perfect imagery that if I ever come across. And I'm very like imagery driven oftentimes. That's why I like folklore and stuff a lot, because of just the imagery it evokes. And I just the concept of it was just a combination of like everything that I love. Because it was like folky, but it was very dark and very strange, almost like a fairy tale too. So with the magical part of it. So yeah, it took me a little while to like figure out what that song was. And once I found what that song was, then I discovered that there's a whole world of these songs called murder ballads. And then I realized that I already knew some of them. And then I saw how essential and foundational they are in like American like music.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that actually your book covers really well, like with your selection, because you choose 20, right? Is that 20
Mm-hmm.
now?
Yes.
And there are a lot of like ones from American history there, but there's also from a lot of world cultures from
Mm-hmm.
and beyond. So what was your selection process? Because I imagine it was probably you had a lot of difficult choices to make.
Yeah, it was very interesting because I've always been drawn to subjects that are very amorphous and kind of hard to like capture in its entirety, like our archetypes, folkloric archetypes and such. But this was just like that, in that every ballad, and the older it is, the more it's going to have, has like sort of like just all these variations that sprout out from it, right? And then those variations bleed into the variations of other songs. So it's this absolute, just amorphous beast of connections and tradition and cultures as well. So it was based a lot on like the ones that I could find information on to begin with. But I didn't always stick to that, because there's a song in there called The Bloody Gardener that I had to do it because of the imagery in it. And I couldn't find that much research on it. So I wasn't able to sort of write or analyze as much. But I didn't care because I really wanted to illustrate it. So illustration was probably the first like filter things had to go through, because this is the first time I've ever written anything. My intention with understanding murder ballads for so long was just to illustrate them. So I was like, well, which ones do I really want to illustrate? And then it was like I went diversity, and I wanted I didn't want them to all be white ballads. And luckily we have some incredible um uh, uh, interesting, fascinating murder ballad traditions and the history of Black American music. It's pretty incredible, and there's incredible scholarship about it as well. So I felt really lucky that I was able to. I was really grateful that there's already like a really fantastic scholarship that existed about that. Um, and I also what had to be conscious of how many songs were similar to each other. So there's this, so the main like sort of tropes or themes, and you can even call it like the subgenre of murder ballads, is what's called a murder sweetheart ballad. And if you're gonna wade into murder ballads, that's gonna be a lot. There's gonna be all different kinds. it's not, but the murdered sweetheart, in which essentially most times a woman gets pregnant, not married to the man who gets her pregnant. He tells her he's going to marry her. He gives her some excuse. He says something to get her to come with him on his horse. Generally, oftentimes his name is Willie. That just happens. Frequently, his name is Willie. And he takes her somewhere and he stabs her or beats her or drowns her in the river, or just kills her, then throws her. They always end up in the river. And it's something that exists, and that like plot, sort of like that plot structure and that concept and that theme and like the sort of like foundational bits of it show up in true crime murder ballads, as well as just like so many just like made up murder ballads that have like spawned off each other. So it was really tricky to like decide like which of these two songs that are so similar to each other do I share, because I wanted to show similarities, but I couldn't just be the same thing after the other. So that was probably the hardest challenge there, was that.
I bet. It was so fascinating to think about these stories like in the context of the evolution of both true crime and like crime
Mm-hmm.
fiction. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you pull out, as you do in some of your like chapters on the songs, you're like, oh, this is in tradition with like Law and Order SVU.
Yeah,
It's like that true crime documentary you just watched on Netflix. Like it is like
exactly.
there's something about it that's so, the songs are so specific sometimes about like the cultures that they come from and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
very universal, like
Yeah.
in both their themes and like our interest in them, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because in my introduction, I write about how like they can be absolutely looked at as like related to true crime, but as far as like just like crime entertainment stories, narratives, Alice Goldwyn is this great writer. She wrote a book called The Dead Girl Show, which is and Laura Palmer of Twin Peaks being kind of like, sort of, when people talk about the Dead Girl Show, they talk about Laura Palmer, because Twin Peaks is set off by this image of this beautiful, still like blue-lipped white woman, right? And I think that at the core of a lot of true crime and like sort of crime narrative is the still dead woman, usually white. And then that can be unpacked like even way further, but I'm not going to. I would, yeah. But I just think it's interesting. And I read some really amazing sort of like theses by women who have studied murder ballads in this lens, talking about how it's like this dead woman that represents like a woman with no agency who cannot transgress anymore. And she's just like, and she's like this person. So I think of like the painting of like Ophelia by the guy whose name I keep forgetting every time I talk about it. But
Malaise,
so,
John Malaise.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I knew it was John. It was
Yeah.
John, the one by John. Um, yeah, so I find that at the core of both those things and at the core of murder ballads. And I find that, I mean, it's very fascinating, and it's something I return to over and over again, just when I'm thinking about sort of general things related to patriarchy, I suppose.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like your writing really gets at that like tension between the fact that like a lot of these songs for the most part are about like marginalized people, marginalized women, either because of their status or their identity,
Mm-hmm.
because they've like transgressed some boundary. But also the songs do like enforce that patriarchy too,
Yeah,
the status quo. So like there is that really interesting tension there that I think you get at really well.
yeah, and that's what became really interesting. That's when I realized that the writing was going to be a lot harder, because I hadn't, like, I knew that there was like analysis that I could do, but once I started like doing like the actual real research, it just kind of became this just can of worms, that where I was like, there's a lot of things that are just very obvious here that need to be pointed out. And it's funny. So I've gotten a couple like negative reviews on like early stuff, and the review and the complaint seems to be like asking if I even like murder ballads because of the way I talk about them. And I think that's a very fair question. And I also let's pause and ask myself that. And I think that's what draws me to like any subject is not only is it interesting, is it something that I can use to understand the world, but like I'm also drawn to it artistically. And I think that they're actually really beautiful. And so they're both of these things at one time. And that's for me, I think will always kind of be like the meat of the for myself with this subject matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really resists your attempt to say that these songs are totally exploitative or totally like
Yeah.
empowering in the other way by telling this story. And I think that like grappling with that complexity is a super
Yeah.
thing to do. Mhm.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of like the reason I, as a like a feminist, am so interested in the horror genre. It's very similar. Um, Horror as a genre can be the most violently, right, misogynistic film genre, but it also is the most transgressive and empowered film space for women, in my opinion, personally. It's like to an extreme.
Yeah.
And so I find that just endlessly interesting. It's very similar.
Oh my gosh, so many songs that we could talk about. I did want to mention the one that you mentioned that you saw the bluegrass version
Oh
of
yeah, yeah. Right, right.
Gaze. That was the first one that I encountered too. I think under
Oh
like
really?
under the Two Sisters name, and it was
Yeah.
a cover by Andrew Bird, like back when I was in college in the early aughts too. Yeah, on one of his super
That's
early albums.
wait, that's crazy because like this was in like the 2000s and I was listening to like Andrew Bird. How did I never stumble upon that? That's so funny. Oh,
That's
the
such a New
2000s.
York
Okay.
in the early aughts thing to be doing, like listening to Andrew Bird. Like,
Girl, it really in Brooklyn. Hey, okay.
so
Memory lane. Wow.
right? And that really got me like into the genre too. What really interested me is that I think you hinted at it before, but that some of the songs are very stable, like they got passed down
Hmm.
orally over time and then written down and remained pretty static, like
Yes.
in their form, but others were very unstable, if you will, like did a
Right.
lot of evolving and like picking up little
Yeah.
local flavor, like wherever it
Hmm.
traveled. That's just
Yeah.
interesting too. I think it's like a really
Yeah.
interesting way to think about like cultural transmission, you know.
Hmm. And it's so similar to folklore. I mean, it is folklore. It
Mm.
is folklore. So it's so interesting that like it's you can have different countries and or even different regions of a country that all have their own version of a fairy tale or a folk tale. I love that.
You're so right that that song in particular does have such a fairy tale feel to it. Like the
It does.
violin, like singing is just like so dreamlike, and they had like
Yeah.
it's
It's a harp. It's a harp in really older versions,
oh, wow.
which is like before I think fiddle. I don't know where like geographically fiddle it became fiddle. I mean that could have happened before it came over to the States. But yeah, it was a harp in some really early versions. Not many, just a few, which makes it to me even more like fairy tale. Like
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
yeah,
almost like medieval type feel to.
yeah, yeah. And the song is it's for anyone who's curious, it's called the Twa Sisters or Two Sisters. That's the old name, but a lot of people might know it as a song called "The Dreadful Wind and Rain" or "Oh, the Wind and Rain." Like, there's a beautiful Gillian Welch version of it that you can only find like on YouTube, which is totally insane, but it's beautiful. And the Grateful Dead did a version of it, so that's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting to think that like, they're still being written to some degree.
Yeah.
Like I
Oh
immediately
yeah.
thought of like, oh my gosh, what's that song that's like it's in the beginning of Kill Bill, the bang bang, he shot me down.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
That's a murder ballad.
and from the perspective, like that's interesting too. Like some are from
Yeah.
the perspective of the murderer and some are the victim. Like that's
Yeah.
all really interesting too. Mhm.
Well, if there was, if I had a lot of money, I would have paid for the rights to talk about and use lyrics of some contemporary ones because they're in the mid in the mid 20th century, there was a shift when women came in and started doing it. You know, there's a great song. Of course, this is the problem. I forget names after I've studied something for a long time, but there's a great song called The Box that he came in. There's Taylor Swift has one called No Body, No Crime. It's incredible. There's Goodbye Earl by the Chicks.
Yes.
Right. So the new murder ballads by women oftentimes have like there's some revenge. There's a little revenge in there, self-defense. Gillian Welch has an incredible one called Caleb Meyer that is honestly just a haunting, beautiful song. So yeah, I love that. But there's copyrights and things, so I wasn't able to. But I did get to speak to them a bit in the introduction.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's such a beautiful book, and I am really grateful that you came to talk about it with us. Thank you so much. I know, people are exhausted when they have a book about to come out, but like, is something on your horizon? What are you looking at next?
Oh my God. Are people normally this exhausted? Because I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm like, I mean, I'm done with it. I have been working on it, but still I feel like I have been. I don't know. Honestly, I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't know. Because this project came at like a sort of a very burnt out point in my like mid-career. So I'm kind of like doing a recovery period for a while. We'll see.
Good. That's important too. That's a very good next.
Yeah. I mean, there will be something else. There will probably, I mean, there's some ideas and there's some conversations, but that's it right now.
I can't wait to see what's next. No rush, whenever it is, take your time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, listeners, please check out Murder Ballads, Illustrated Lyrics and Lore. As I said, it's absolutely beautiful. And I think it would be a really beautiful gift for like both the history or the horror fan in your life. I think it appeals to both those crowds. They're the same crowd sometimes,
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It's time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.